Hey there, it's Jason. This is episode 5, and it's going to be all about the neck. This is one of the last steps we got left. I'm going to finish up the neck, put the hardware on, do some fret work, and then attach it to the body. If you've looked around like I did, you see that there are a lot of very specialized tools that can be used for fret work, and they can get very expensive. I still don't know how much money I want to lay out for this whole hobby. I want to see if this is something I'm going to do over and over again, or if it's a one-time thing before I blow all this money on expensive equipment. So I looked for stuff that wasn't too expensive, but also wasn't crap, that didn't get the bad reviews online about, oh, this fret leveler is not level at all, or these files are horrible. So I will show you what I got, and I'll put links down below if you want to get the same things. I got a fret leveler. I was just going to do this myself with just a regular hardware level and put some sandpaper on it. But this came from what looks to be a legitimate guitar making company, and I figured they're going to have to make something that's going to be flatter than whatever I could make. And it only cost $20, so that definitely seemed reasonable. They also had this relatively cheap fret rocker that I think was $5 or $6. Seemed useful to have. The crowning file, which could get very expensive, I got this Baroque one that I think cost about $30. It seems like it's pretty high quality. I saw really good reviews for it. And then I got a variety pack of files, hoping that there are enough in here that are going to be good to do the edges of the frets, to round those. And we're going to try all this out and see how it works. And on that note, it's go time. The first thing I did was purely cosmetic. This spot on the back of the headstock wasn't taking stain very well, and it was kind of bothering me. So I figured I would cover it up with a little sticker, something to remind me of what was going on while I was building this. Onto the neck, I used my notched straight edge to see how flat it was before I started leveling the frets. I had to get really close in on this, and it was pretty damn straight. You could sort of see here on either side of the marked fret, which I think is like the 6th and the 8th, that there's a tiny little difference, but not a lot. So I don't think I need to adjust the truss rod at all, so I won't be needing this. I put a strip of 220 sandpaper on my leveling beam with double stick tape, taped off the fretboard up to the edge of each of the frets, and then cut along them with an X-Acto knife to make it straight. Marked each of the frets with a Sharpie marker. The reason to do this is so that when you're leveling frets, you know that you're actually taking stuff off, and you can get a sense of which of the frets are higher from which of the marker points disappear first. And you go till there's no marker left, which means they are now all at the same height, theoretically. And then it's time to get out the leveling beam. It's hard to see, but this is the way the fretboard should look after you've leveled some frets, with some of the marker points starting to disappear. After checking it and seeing where the marks still remained, I put the sander back down and focused on those parts until those marks had disappeared as well. And here's what they look like. A little rough, but I guess otherwise good. No marker left. So I used the leveling beam again, but this time with a strip of 400 sandpaper to try to smooth out the scratches caused by the 220. And after the 400, clean it up with some 4/0 steel wool. And that should be enough to get it as smooth as it needs to get. So then I went back and I checked the frets 3 at a time with my fret rocker tool. If it rocked at all, it meant that the middle of the 3 was still a little bit too high. So in those cases where I found that little wobble, I would mark it as such with the marker wherever it happened, either in the center or on either of the sides. There wasn't a lot of it at the top of the fretboard, but as I got down to the bottom, the higher frets, there was a lot more of it. Came back with the leveler again, to make sure that those high points were lowered a bit. I found that it was going very slowly. I kept coming back and checking with the fret rocker, and a lot of those high points were still there. So I probably could have used a lower grit sandpaper to start, and it would have taken off a little more material. Instead, I had to use the 220 a lot in order to lower it and then come back with the 400 and the steel wool. But it finally got to the point where either all the frets were level or I was just tired of doing it. Now for crowning, you mark the tops again. And the idea for the crowning is you've now flattened the frets, but they shouldn't be flat on top. They should really be more of a rounded point. So I used my crowning tool and scratched back and forth on each side. And the idea is you're going to take off most of the marker except for a very small line right across the middle of the fret, which will be your point that you want to stay at the height that you just leveled it to. For comparison, those frets are untouched there. And then here are some frets that I have leveled where you can see just that thin black line running down the fret. So those, I believe, are properly crowned. The next part is to round the edges. I don't know if it needed it or not. It didn't really look weird to me. I don't feel anything when I'm rubbing up and down them, but I thought I'd try it anyway. Then took the tape off. Now for getting out the, what do you call them, fret spurs, I think they call it, that stick out of the side of the frets and maybe will hurt your fingers as you're playing. Again, I didn't really feel that at all, but I thought, let's just go ahead and try this. And I had done this on another guitar, so even though it doesn't seem to be the main luthier way and there should be a special tool to use for it, I used a sanding sponge, held it at a 45-degree angle between perpendicular to the fretboard and parallel to the fretboard, and ran it along there. Just a little bit. It only took off a little bit, but I think it's supposed to make the edge smoother. Feels smooth. The fretboard was really dry, so I definitely wanted to get something on there. I used this lemon oil, put it all over the fretboard, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then I came back with a clean rag and wiped it up to get any excess off. Here are the two sizes of screws, the small one that I used during the dry build and the bigger one that I'd like to use now so that I can use the small ones on the pickguard. There's barely any difference in the size. I think one's a little longer and the head is a little bigger, but otherwise hopefully it should fit interchangeably. We'll find out. And here goes. Of course it fit just fine. When I had it all done, I noticed that top left one there is not exactly straight. It's just a little bit off, and that's going to drive me crazy probably for the rest of my life, so I wanted to fix that. Took it off, did the toothpick trick, cutting off the edge. I'm going to cover it with some wood glue, pop it in the hole, wipe up some of that extra glue with the Q-tip. Came back the next day, clipped off as much of the toothpick as I could, just with some nail clippers. I sanded it down. Maybe not the best idea. I don't know how you sand down a single point like that because I did scratch a little bit, but it's all going to be covered up with the tuners, so no one's going to see it. Now that that was done, I could drill a new hole. Put a piece of tape around the drill bit at the length of the screw so I made sure I didn't go down further than I need to and maybe accidentally pop out the other side. The hole was so close to the other one that I had filled up that I was worried maybe it was going to cave in the toothpick structure that I had built inside of it, but it was fine. It really just was like it was a solid piece of wood. And so much better now. Tape off. And now that I freed up those small screws, I could put in my pickguard. The truss rod cover. Way back in episode 1, I fixed the placement of the holes on these just like I did for the tuning machine a couple seconds back. And there we go. Time to put the neck on the body. This is something people do, right? I'm going to cut this section down a lot since it ended up being several days of putting the neck on and taking it back off to try to find the right combination of shim heights to put in the neck pocket, to tilt the neck back enough to get the action where I wanted it on the fretboard, as well as adjusting the bridge height to where the strings weren't too high above the pickup. In retrospect, I really wish I had spent a little more time in the beginning crunching numbers and doing some math, keeping better notes on which shims did what, and not fully stringing the guitar up until I knew I had the right height. Next episode, I will fine-tune the action and do the rest of the setup to finish up this guitar. See you then.